All right. So, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Give us a little background about yourself.
I am Scott James. I'm a fourth-generation Colorado native. I'm from LaSalle. I live in Johnstown.
Okay.
I am. What do I do? That's
Yeah,
a
what
big
do you do,
question.
man?
I am a follower of Jesus. I am
Yeah.
a public servant. I am a husband. I'm a father. I guess if you were to ask me to describe what I do, I would say I'm a public servant.
Yeah.
Right now I do that through my job as a Weld County Commissioner. I'm a 40-year radio broadcaster by profession, so I'm not used to the camera. I am, however, used to the microphone.
You know what? A
face
lot of,
for radio, right?
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of radio guys say they have a face for radio. I'm like, no, you look great. So, okay, so you're a public servant. So what inspired you? Maybe it was something in your family. I don't know if your parents were politically involved, but like, what inspired you to get into politics? And what age were you like, did you become aware of like politics? Because I probably wasn't even aware until I was 14 or 15 years
There's
old.
a couple of good questions. My mom and dad were divorced when I was 7. My mom reared me in LaSalle. My mother was not at all politically involved, or she wouldn't. She'd watch the news, but she wouldn't shake her fist at either side.
Yeah.
Now news is a full contact, full involvement sport.
What news channel would she have been watching?
We were Walter Cronkite and the CBS Evening News. I'm
Okay.
about twice your age, Nate. So So mom was informed, but not overly politically aware. My grandfather was a Republican before Republicans are cool, and were Republicans ever cool? I don't know.
We're getting there.
But he would talk about politics with my great uncle, and I remember them having vague conversations, but I was not aware of what they were talking about or whom they were talking about.
Yeah.
We can talk a little bit about how I got into it when I became aware.
Real quick, before you glance over it, what about your dad? Was your dad involved?
Dad was not much in the picture at all, quite frankly.
Really?
We lived in Orlando, Florida at the time that Mom and Dad were divorced. Dad stayed in Orlando with his job at then Martin Marietta. My dad was just not in the picture, is the bottom line.
Really? So forgive me, how old were you when they
7.
got divorced? 7. Okay, do you remember it or not too much?
I remember them fighting one night, but nothing, just a little argument that woke me up one night, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
My father, I get my height and my analytical brain. My father worked for Martin Marietta, was in aerospace engineering at the time that Martin was involved in the space program back in the old Gemini and Mercury and Apollo days, and Ed was all a part of that, and he later got into weapons systems. So the kind of the analytical part of me comes from that.
Did you get to spend much time with him as a kid, or was it
little, very little?
So almost exclusively your mom?
Yeah. I'm a product of my mother,
Yeah.
Who gave me my stinking sense of humor. She gave me my quick wit. She gave me my common sense.
Yeah.
And she
That's
gave me
important.
my big butt. I wish she wouldn't have given me that.
Not the worst trait you could have.
who I am is as an individual is largely a reflection of my mother. I think kind of the analytical part of me that I have a very compartmentalized brain, and so that comes from my dad, the aerospace guy.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to skip over too much, but like, did you ever end up like reconnecting with your dad, or have you ever built a relationship with him? Really?
No. To answer that question, no.
Really?
He was always a card on birthdays kind of guy. He was there but not there. My father is a very emotionally disconnected guy. As it stands today, I haven't spoken to him in 6-7 years.
Yeah.
And it's not good, bad, sad, or indifferent. It just is. It's my reality, and I hope he's well. And one of these days I'll reach out to him. He'll be 90 in November, and I guess I better do it soon.
Well, that's good genes, though. At least you got a good prospect of a long, healthy life. Maybe
you're telling me I got another 30 years of this.
Hopefully, I certainly hope so.
So back to your question of how I became involved and how I became aware.
Yeah.
How I became aware is kind of interesting. I went along, not involved at all in politics or any of that kind of thing. I was a senior in high school in the fall of 1980. Now do the math on who was running for president in the fall of 1980.
Is that a Reagan?
Yeah, I wonder who. I heard this man that would come on and interrupt my cheesy pop songs on AM 95 KIMN. I would hear this man speak about a shining city on the hill and what the great promise of America was. And I said, this guy's not the typical politicians that I've heard blah, blah, blah from. This guy speaks my heart. And I have been a conservative, and I have been a Republican ever since. A big disappointment. I was about 5 weeks too young to vote for Ronald Reagan. My birthday is December 9th, so I couldn't vote for him in his first election, but I did vote for him in his second. And I am what I would consider a Reagan-style pragmatist, a classical conservative to this day.
Yeah.
A lot because of that guy.
Okay, and then so that was when you were 18, and then when surely there came a point. Well, okay, let me ask you this: was radio first, or was political involvement
radio
first?
was first.
So how did you get into the radio industry?
I went out to Northeastern Junior College. I spent a year as a state FFA officer. Took a year off, gap year as kids call it today.
A year as what kind of officer?
A state FFA, Future Farmers.
Oh,
I was actively involved in vocational education and vocational agriculture. In fact, because of it, decided I wanted to be an ag teacher. I wanted to teach farm kids how to be farm kids.
Did you raise animals and plant crops?
Mom lived in town, but all my extended family, aunts, uncles, her cousins, my cousins, all that kind of stuff, all farmed, and a lot of them still do farm today in and around LaSalle. I worked on a feedlot and a ranch in and around LaSalle, and so ag was very much a part of my upbringing. But to my immediate family, just mom, did not farm. But I kind of fell in love with agriculture and fell in love with vocational agriculture education and that type of thing. So I thought I wanted to be an ag teacher. I took a year off, was that state FFA officer, traveled around. But when I was 19, I went to Northeastern Junior College, where I majored in ag education. I wound up serving. I was state vice president. The state president on my FFA officer team was a guy by the name of Troy Whitmore. Troy, to this day, in fact, he's about ready to retire, is a governmental relations vice president, kind of an outreach vice president at United Power.
Yeah.
But Troy had spent a year at NJC, where he worked at KSTC.
Okay.
And we were all going out one night drinking 3-2 beer or doing something like that. And he
3 or 2 or 10.
No, well, 3.2. This is before your day. 3-2 beer. Colorado, if you're older, Colorado had a classification. It was like watered down beer.
That's right.
And when we were kids, you could go into 3-2 beer bars when you were 18.
Okay.
And so we were all going out to a 3-2 beer bar one night, and Troy had to work a radio show. He had to be a disc jockey. And he would beg me, come on, just come hang out with me.
Yeah.
I was naturally curious. I'd never considered it as a profession, but I was naturally curious. I walked into that radio studio, and I have been and always will be kind of a tech guy. In fact, coming down here to film, you showed me the audio-video room. I wanted to turn on the lights, sit down, and start playing with stuff. To this day, I'm still kind of fascinated by technology.
Yeah.
And I walked into that studio, and I thought, what do I have to do with it to play with all this stuff? I just wanted to twist the knobs and stuff, And so I literally talked his boss into giving me a job. And that's kind of how my radio career began. I did Sunday mornings.
A job as what?
I started on Sunday mornings playing Casey Kasem on records.
Okay.
Casey Kasem used to come on records, and I played the records.
Did you talk
Did
as
not
well?
Talk. Did not talk.
You just played the music.
Played the records and played the commercials. And one day they had a guy that was sick and couldn't show up to do his disc jockey shift, so to speak, his show. And the program director called me and said, "Okay, you want to come learn this stuff?"
Yeah.
Sure, why not? And I fell in love, Nathan, with something that I still romanticize about. I'm still a broadcaster. I fell in love with this, with communication, with conversation, with the power of one's voice and the things one can say that will move people in a given direction.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the relationship that an old school radio station could develop with the community. From the standpoint of fundraisers and public service and involvement. And that's what, it was cool that people might recognize my name or my voice, and somebody might buy me one of them 3-2 beers one night at the bar because I was somebody they'd heard come out of a set of speakers. But that lasts a very short time.
Yeah.
What kept me in the business was the public service aspect of it, was the ability to serve a community and to maybe move the needle and do some good for a society, for a community, for a culture. And that's what kept me in it until when I retired just this last fall.
So that first job when you were just playing the records and playing the ads, I assume the ads were on tape and you had to like manually switch
what they call a
them out,
cart. It was essentially like an 8-track tape. You put it in, you hit the button, it plays it, and it stops at the beginning again.
Yeah.
So audio cart.
So what radio station was that one?
That was KSCC.
Okay.
It came. I graduated.
Is that still around?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's still in Sterling. I graduated in JC, and it was time to transfer to CSU like all good ad majors. But I had fallen in love with the radio business.
Did you have Temple Grandin as a professor?
No. She is.
You know who that is, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do. She's fascinating individual, but never did. I didn't transfer, and therein lies the point. I decided, no, I'm going to go chase fame and fortune as a radio disc jockey. So I went to the big city of Great Bend, Kansas. And then I kind of started to move around. I wound up in Amarillo, Texas, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. I woke up one morning, my contract was due. They wanted to sign me for another 4 years.
So you're traveling and doing
I just
shows,
going town to town, up and down the dial, WKRP Cincinnati stuff.
Was this freelance or was this the company moving you around?
It was not the company. It was just, okay, I've been here for a year now and I want to find a bigger market. I want to find a better job.
Yeah.
You send out tapes and resumes and see what comes in.
Okay.
And I woke up one morning and I was in San Antonio, Texas. I had a #1 radio show in a top 10 market in the nation, and I deep down inside was unhappy. I was too stupid at that time to realize that I was 29 years old.
Why do you think you were unhappy there?
Because I wasn't where God wanted me, quite frankly. I mean, of course, I say that with a maturity now that I didn't understand then, but I came home to be in Troy Whitmore, the guy that got me into the business.
Yeah.
Came home to be at his wedding. And I was in his wedding on a Saturday night, and Sunday I thought, well, I better drive up to LaSalle, see my mom while I'm here in town.
Yeah.
And I was talking to her about, well, geez, they want me to sign another 4-year deal tomorrow. And I'm not too sure whether I want to do this. And my mother said...
In San Antonio.
Yeah, in San Antonio.
For 4 more years.
Yeah, exactly. And I talked to Mom in LaSalle, and I said, well, I got to go get on this plane, and I got to go back to San Antonio. And tomorrow, they want me to sign another deal, and I just don't know. And she says, well, honey, you can always come home and go to school and finish school. She always wanted me to finish school. And I'm sitting there.
What kind of money were they offering you? Was it like significant money at the time? Was it appealing?
Yeah, it was appealing. I mean, it was.
I was considering it.
I was top 10 percentage in pay, probably in the business, and I was considering it, but I wasn't happy. That's what I didn't realize is that I wasn't happy, and that's because I was being called home. Home being here in Colorado, and so I went. Mom has that stuck in my head, and I get on the plane, and we're at the old Stapleton. This is before DIA, but the old Stapleton, and the plane takes off, and it's Sunday evening.
Is that the airport before DIA?
Yeah, that's the airport before.
The same spot?
The
same location?
Now it's a subdivision that's in the Stapleton area now. Okay. But
I just assumed DIA was always there. Since the invention of airplanes. No.
Early 90s is when they built DIA.
Since the Wright brothers took flight.
Oh, you're making me feel old, pal.
Keep going.
I'm sitting on the runway, and the plane starts to take off, and I literally look out as the sun sets over the Rockies.
Okay.
And I went, yep, I'm coming home.
Yeah,
I made that decision right then and there. So I went in that next morning after I got off the air. I did a morning show, and I said, hey, Mr. Andrews, I'm going to go back home and go to school.
Yeah.
And he says, I will never discourage you from continuing your education, and what's your timeline? I said, well, I really don't have one. I said, why don't you take your time, find my replacement, and when you find my replacement, I'll leave. A month goes by, 2 months goes by, 3 months goes by. I realize they're using me. They got another ratings period out of me. And so I went in and I said, hey, Mr. Andrews, 2 weeks. And so I gave him a 2-week notice, and I came home, and that was the fall of 1990.
So you did not sign that contract
I did not sign the contract.
Wow.
And that was the fall of 1990 that I came home to Colorado.
Yeah.
And I got a job on the air, but I kind of reoriented what I did. I went back to school. I finally graduated CSU and turned 40 all in the same year.
So on the air, Well, let me ask you this. What was the first job that you got when you moved back to Colorado? When you decided not to stay in San Antonio, you moved back. What was the radio station? What were they having you do there?
I did a morning show at the old Tri 102 when it was on South College in Fort Collins.
Okay.
Did mornings with a guy by the name of Gary Scott Thomas. Gary left Tri 102 at the same time I left Tri 102. Gary went out to KRTY in San Jose and just retired from there here a few months ago. So Gary stayed there ever since. I left Tri 102 and went to work, be a program director and do an air shift at K99, which is where a lot of people kind of got to know me in the country music world. I met my wife, got married, went to work for iHeart, spent the last 20 years of my career at iHeartRadio, just right across the street from where we're at here.
Yeah.
And my public service career kind of came to grow during that time. So fast forward to 1998.
Do you mind if I pause you and ask a little bit more about the radio before we get
drill in
to more politics stuff? So for the radio, so you started at iHeart, and you said you were there for 20 years, and that was iHeart is country exclusively, or they have multiple stations?
Oh, iHeart's the largest broadcast ownership group in the nation. They have over 1,200 stations. Yeah,
gotcha.
Just across the street over here by Harley and Hooters, where I worked for most of my time. They have 7 radio stations there.
When you started there, did it already have a good-sized audience, or did you? I mean, how much did you build it over that time?
You know, I worked for a couple of different stations with iHeart.
Okay.
I worked for 97.9 in 2 different incarnations. They called it Sunny 97.9 for a while. It was an adult contemporary station. Then Big 97.9, which is the country station that it continues to be today.
Yeah.
I worked for their news talk outlet for 600 KCOL. I did a political news talk show for a few years. And so, yeah, my tenure with iHeart was at more than one station. I worked for the company then.
Gotcha.
You know, back in the day, you kind of worked just for one station because it was all kind of mom and pop ownership groups. And then in '96, when Clinton deregulated the ownership caps, that's when all the consolidation started taking place. And
so for Big 97.9, was that so? It was country music. How long did you do that one specifically? That's actually how I knew you. I actually listened to your radio show before I ever met you, which is crazy. Like, it just because I was talking to my dad about it. You're like, hey, he told me, he's like, hey, you know, he goes to our church, right? I was like, what? That was just mind blowing. I was like, no, this guy's way too big.
It's mind blowing that I actually went to church.
Well, I just thought I just assumed that you were just completely unapproachable and like so out of reach. And I was like. Well, when he said you go to our church, I was like, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, no way. Like, anyway, so
that's very flattering, and I'm a real boy. And no, one of the things that I lasted in, my 2 chosen professions, radio and public service, have some of the most monumental egos you'll ever meet. Massive egos. I just don't have one. I'm a real boy. I have no room for that kind of stuff, and so I have always just kind of been uniquely me on the radio and in politics, so to speak. I am who I am, and maybe that's why I lasted 40 years in the business.
And the country station was the last one you were at? That's the one.
That's when I retired from.
Okay, and then how many years were you there?
I did mornings on that with Sadie for 15 and a half years.
Okay, and then. I don't know how does radio track their metrics and their numbers? And then follow-up question to that would be, where did you start, and then what kind of numbers did you end up with by the time you left?
The station was in the toilet when they asked me to. I had worked for iHeart at the time. In fact, I was programming 600 KCOL and doing a little afternoon news, kind of political talk show, and I thought I was happy as a clam. This is, because my interests kind of aligned then with my profession, and I thought this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to die a talk show host.
Yeah.
And iHeart didn't have that in mind. They called me back over to the country side of things because I knew I had the experience at K99, and they had launched this new country station, and it sucked. It was off to a bad start.
Oh, no.
And so they wanted to tap in. My boss came upstairs, and he sat down in my office, and he says, Scotty, you can't call me Scotty. He could. Scotty, what do you think of this country station? Well, Stu, it sucks. Yeah, that's the problem.
Had you already?
I listened. Oh yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I was in the building and I was
Right.
listening with interest, but it wasn't my responsibility.
Okay.
It was another guy's responsibility. And I said, Stu, it's not good. It needs some work. Well, we're going to ask you to program it. And I said, I kind of figured that's why you're in my office. And he said, I'll tackle that project. He says, and I need you to do the morning show. I said, nope, not going to do morning shows. Morning shows ruin your life. You're up at 2 a.m. You can't be a real person. You lose contact with your family. I am not going to do a morning show.
Yeah.
So he went downstairs and his tail was between his legs. And in about 5 minutes, his boss called. A fellow by the name of Lee Larson in Denver. And Lee says, Scott, we need you to do this morning show. And I said, Lee, morning shows ruin your life. I'm not going to do a morning show. No, thank you. All right. Phone call was over. 5 minutes later, this is iHeartMedia. 5 minutes later, Tom Pullman, who's the senior vice president of programming in New York, calls and said, Scott, he says, you will do this morning show. And I said, yes, sir. And when do I start? So my fortitude lasted 2 levels of management, you know.
That's funny.
But I said, I'm not going to do it with you're not going to find me another disc jockey. We're not going to
Did they at least offer you more money or some type of benefits package?
A little bit more money, but it was the project trying to turn that country station around that was intriguing to me. I didn't want to do the morning show. I said, but if I'm going to do one, I'm not going to do it with another disc jockey. I'm a disc jockey.
Typically kind of the peak
that's
for when people listen?
That's the premiere show. Yeah, that's when people
Driving
are
to
getting up and
whatever.
doing their thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, having the morning show was good. I said, but I'm not going to do it with another disc jockey. I want somebody normal. And
you want a normal person.
Yeah, I want a real boy or girl. I don't want another ego. I don't need scratch and sniff or ick and frick in the morning. I don't need that. I didn't want to do that. It didn't appeal to me,
Yeah.
And so I was working with Jennifer Kaler, and she did middays for the station. I worked with Jennifer years ago at K99. Jennifer and I have had a long history. And Jennifer said, well, what about Sadie? In my mind, Sadie was 6 years old. That's when I met Sadie.
Yeah.
Well, Sadie's not 6 years old. She's 26 years old, and she has 2 kids. Bring her in.
Was she in the industry at that point, or
she was a stay-at-home mom?
Okay.
And I said, bring her in. Because I remembered Sadie. Sadie was Jennifer's daughter. And I'd always known Sadie, but I never thought of her as a radio talent.
So that was her first radio gig?
And she walked in and she sat down and she walked into my office and we just started giving each other crap, basically. We just started, what you heard on the radio is what Sadie and I did in kind of our real life relationship. And it was just magical. It's only happened one other time in my career, that kind of chemistry. And it's so funny because we are so uniquely different. I'm 20 years older than Sadie. I'm a conservative, kind of a buttoned-up guy. She's a nose-ringed hippie chick, but we just hit it off. We just hit it off. Yeah. And what people heard on the radio was just the relationship that we had. And like I say, radio program directors and radio stations try to do that all the time. We're going to put Ick with Frick over here, and we're going to build a morning show.
Yeah.
And you've got to have that chemistry, and it just does not. It's natural. You can't manufacture it. And Sadie and I had it, and we had 15 years later, we called her quits.
Yeah. And then, so when you started, it was in the toilet, wasn't going good. You turned it around. Yeah. And what kind of growth are we talking about here? How much did you actually improve
the radio station saw 160, 180% what they call cum growth. Cum's cumulative audience, total number of people that listen.
Gotcha.
And there's average quarter-hour share, and I left number 1. It was number 12, 13 when I took it over. And
in the state?
I know, just in now we talk Nielsen ratings.
Okay.
Nielsen has what they call ADIs, areas of dominant influence. Okay. Our ADI is Greeley, Fort Collins, Loveland.
Gotcha.
Is Northern Colorado. Denver's a completely different Nielsen market, so to speak.
Northern Colorado, basically.
Northern Colorado.
Yeah.
And I left it in November. But, 97.9, I had a big frequency, and we had a loyal following down in the metro area as well. And it was a fun project. But
that's kind of awesome.
I was never hugely driven by ratings. You got to be driven by revenue. The station's got a bill if you want to be on the air. I was just more driven by being meaningful, by having an impact on the community, by leaving people with a smile and maybe something to think about. And it was a good job.
last question, then we can move on to politics. So, for the country radio station, what would you say is one or maybe a couple, but like the biggest change that you made that like, hey, if we did this thing differently, this I think could turn the ship around and really help you guys standing and grow the audience a little bit.
Country programmers. Program directors. Program directors are product managers, basically, in radio terminology. Country program directors, there are very few natural country program directors that understand the lifestyle. They think that country music listeners are pickup driving, farm living rednecks. And there's still a few good old-fashioned, by God, pickup driving, farm living rednecks. But by and large, a country music audience is just normal folks. It's just folks that like the music and kind of get a kick out of the lifestyle, and it's a choice they make, you know. And so program directors, by and large, make the mistake of, this is a station for rednecks. I'm going to image it like a redneck. I'm going to program it like a redneck. Yeehaw. Massive mistake.
Yeah.
I trust me, country music listeners will know who Beyonce and Britney Spears is just as much as they will George Strait and Garth Brooks. Yeah. And so you've got to understand that it's just another segment, another faction of pop culture, and program it that way. Yeah. And that's what I did. Is I put together, and I hate to say this, but it's what it is, an intelligent country music station. Yeah. That didn't demean its listeners. Right. And it was really pretty successful.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea. Don't demean your.
Don't treat them like rednecks. Some of them are, but don't treat them like rednecks.
So earlier you started to talk about politics. I kind of interrupted you a little bit. You were about to tell me, as you were doing this radio thing, you started doing politics. When was that? What happened? How did you first get into politics?
Julie and I married in May of '97. We rented a house the first year we were married. We wanted to buy a house, but let's settle down in our life together and then start looking for a house. Yeah. We were living in Fort Collins at the time. Oh my God, I thought I was going to have to live in that city. Thank you, Lord. I didn't. I thought, my wife's from Fort Collins, and I thought I'm going to have to live in that city. And we were renting a house in Fort Collins. We went over to see my mom, who was still living in LaSalle, one Sunday morning for brunch. I heard they were building some houses in Johnstown, so let's drive back through. On the way back to Fort Collins, let's kind of drive through Johnstown. And we went there, and I looked at this house, and it had everything we wanted, and it was $60,000 cheaper than what it was in Fort Collins. And so we printed out the contract, we signed the deal. And like Zsa Zsa Gabor in Green Acres, I took my country club girl to the country, and I thought, boy, I won't keep her here. And she fell in love with Johnstown, same way I did. We moved to town. It had 3,200 people. Today we're at about 20,000. Wow. And that was...
and it's still growing.
It is. We closed on our house on April Fool's Day, 1998. I know, ironic.
Did you think it was real, or did you think it was a prank? No, I'm kidding.
I knew it was real, but I didn't. I thought we'd be there just long enough to build some equity, and then she was going to haul my butt back to Fort Collins. Yeah. And but she fell in love with the little town too. We built a second house, the house we live in today. We built and have come to know and love that little town. The first subdivision we moved into was being developed by a local. Literally a farmer who was trying to bring an entire subdivision to grade with an implement he had attached to the back of his John Deere. Yeah. It was kind of a self-made job. And so I'm watching this subdivision come online and going, I don't think that's the grade. And there were some things that struck me as wrong. It was a small subdivision.
With duct tape and
well, he had some actual professional builders in there, but he was doing a lot of the dirt work himself, and it was a little. But Ron Ehrlich was his name. He's long since passed. Good guy. He and I became actually reasonable friends. But in the beginning, we were kind of enemies because Ronnie brought us all together at this little barbecue, and there was about 6 houses in a 98-home subdivision. And the thing was that they were going to have smaller lots, but lots of greenbelt. Okay. And there was a lot of greenbelt. They put in all this greenbelt. It was like 6 acres of greenbelt, and there were 6 homes built. And he says, "Well, I'm going to turn the maintenance of this greenbelt over to you guys." I started doing the math and thinking, well, my HOA fees are going to be $1,500, $1,800 a month to pay the landscape companies to take care of it. He can't possibly do this. So I got on the old primitive dial-up internet and found something called the Common Interest Ownership Act, which is a series of laws that deal with subdivisions that have common interest property, and found out that sure enough, it's against the law for him to turn that over to the homeowners association until 70% of the lots are sold.
Gotcha.
And so I thought, well, how do I bring this up? Well, there's something called a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and he's asking for another subdivision at this Planning and Zoning Commission, and there's something called a public hearing. I had no clue what either one, a Planning and Zoning Commission was or a public hearing was. I didn't know. But I decided to go and lift up my voice and say, hey, I don't mind that you're considering giving this guy another subdivision, but he needs to do this one right before you give him a second one.
Yeah.
And the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission comes up afterwards and he says, well, you're a pretty well-spoken guy. And I said, well, thanks. And he says, and we have an opening.
More responsibility.
Don't gripe unless you're willing to do something about it, right?
That's funny.
And so I said yes. And within 3 months, I was chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I did that for 3.5 years and truly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I thought, I might run for town council.
Did you have to work your way up over those 3 months, or did they just appoint you?
The guy who was chairman resigned. There's an election. We want that guy. I was that guy. I was the chairman. Okay. Now, that was an appointed position. That was appointed by the town council. That was not an election. It is the spring of 2002, and I decided I'm going to run for town council because there's a couple of open seats, and I thought this might be fun. So I put together my first campaign. I printed out about 60 yard signs, some little flyers off my inkjet printer, and spent about $300.
For town council, right? Yeah.
Getting elected to the Johnstown Town Council.
$300.
I know, that was my budget.
That's not too bad.
That was my budget.
Golly.
I spent, I campaigned, so to speak, and I beat a couple of old city fathers, a couple of old guys that were long associated with Johnstown, so the new folk didn't know how to take me.
For a city council election, are people looking at party affiliation?
It's nonpartisan. Yeah.
Okay, so you don't even have like an R or a D
not
next
an
to
R or
your
a D
name.
behind your name. Yeah.
Gotcha.
City, even Denver
like
City
that.
Council. City
I like
council
that.
elections are nonpartisan in the state of Colorado. So I was elected in 2002, ran again in 6, 10, 14. Ran for mayor and was elected in 16, ran for county commissioner in 2018, and was reelected in 2022.
Okay. Heck yeah.
People say, geez, disc jockey / politician. I hate that term, politician. I'm a public servant. Disc jockey / politician. How do the two mix? Communicating, listening, serving, driving a community forward. It's all things that I did on the radio, and it was just very natural for me to do them as an elected public servant. And I love what I do. Love it.
That's awesome. Okay, so was the level of responsibility much different transitioning from mayor of Johnstown to Weld County Commissioner?
Yes. Many of the tasks are the same. Running a county is very similar to running a town. Obviously, county commissioner is a partisan election. You run as a partisan. So I stepped up and had to show the world that I was a nasty Republican. Mayor was not a partisan election. People know.
Yeah.
They
hear
know.
you talk, for more than 5 minutes.
And if you espouse some sort of conservative belief, they'll put it together.
Yeah.
It's considerably different. Weld County is a big place, 4,018 square miles, fastest growing county in the state, third fastest growing county in the nation.
Approximately how many people are in that?
About 361,000 right now. State demographer says by 2045 we'll double in population.
And what percentage of those people actually vote in the commissioner election?
That's a good question. I'm trying to do the math on. It seems to me there are about 240,000 registered voters in Weld County.
Yeah.
Now, our charter says that there are 2 at-large commissioners and 3 elected from districts. I'm the commissioner from District 2, so I'm elected by the people in District. District 2 is basically southwest Weld County.
Gotcha.
Put a pin down in the middle of Greeley. Everything to the south and west on down into the corner of the county is District 2.
Gotcha.
So I was elected from District 2, but you become a county commissioner for the entire county, so to speak.
Yeah.
But you're just elected from a given district.
So you're representing the whole county. And
Yeah.
And then what, just day to day, what does that look like?
Well, today, the tie today, Mondays and Wednesdays, we have our normal business meetings, and we have a tie requirement. So I'm suited up on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then Tuesdays, what's interesting about Weld County, there are 64 counties in the state. Only 2 of them are home rule, have a home rule charter, and Weld County is one of them. Our charter dictates that there is not a county manager. Larimer County, where we sit now, has a county manager.
Okay.
In fact, if you're a statutory county, which 62 of the 64 are, a county manager is a part of your makeup, but Weld County does not have a county manager. So we work directly with our department heads in the day-to-day operation of the county.
Yeah.
Now, trust me, I know nothing about running a Department of Human Services. I know nothing about running a Department of Public Works. That's why we have department heads. They're the professionals. But we do work with them in the day-to-day ins and outs management of a county.
Yeah.
It's very... I like the nuts and bolts. I say if a local government, county, municipal, if a local government is doing their job right, you don't know about them and you don't care. It's when they're not doing their job right that all of a sudden, why is my water springing a leak? That's a municipal problem. Call your town.
Right.
But county roads, Department of Human Services, Departments of Public Health, all land use planning, all in a county purview.
And is that basically your full-time job at this point?
That is my full-time job. Yeah. In fact, our county charter says that it must be your primary focus.
Okay.
And so
Do they measure that just by your finances? Like the majority of your money has to come from that, or what?
I don't think there's a given metric set up, Nathan. I talked to my fellow commissioners when I was elected and said, look, I think I'm going to keep this radio job going, and I'll go in the morning and meet Sadie, and I'll record most of what we do. But trust me, I had gotten up in the morning at 2, had already gone on to do radio, and had gotten to the office and usually beat my fellow commissioners to the office. So I did the 2 jobs for my first term. And then I got a stupid crazy hair this last summer and decided I was going to run for Congress. Pinched me, thank goodness that's over. But when I decided to run for Congress, that's when iHeart said, it's
might be a conflict of interest.
Maybe time to retire.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
Yeah. So there's just a concern that maybe there would be an issue there.
The concern is, and if you ever listen to me, I never mentioned a campaign. I never mentioned that I was a county. I might mention I was a county commissioner, but not I'm Scott James, vote for me.
Right.
That's just an ethical boundary I wouldn't cross, and plus it was a legal one.
Yeah.
But the most valuable thing that a quote-unquote politician has, let's be honest, is name recognition. And just by virtue of my career, I had some pretty sound name recognition, And there was a concern by the company that the race that I was running for, the 8th congressional race, is likely one of the most contested in the nation, and there was a concern that the Democrats might be standing up and asking for equal time, and that was a liability that iHeart understandably didn't want to deal with. Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned briefly that you ran for Congress. What was that like? I mean, just like really though. I mean. We don't have to talk about it too much if you don't want to, but like, what made you decide to want to do that, and then how did that go, and what was that process like? I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. Now you're talking about national level politics.
Our family affiliation is obviously one of. I enjoy your company and consider you a friend.
Yeah.
Your father is one of my better friends. Your father is not only one of my better friends, but my pastor. And I consulted my pastor when I thought about running for Congress, and he wanted to know what the hell was the matter with me. He was encouraging, and I truly felt like the good Lord was calling me to run. And there was this question in my mind of, can a regular, everyday guy with a public servant's heart be elected to Congress? I think I answered that question because I'm still a sitting county commissioner and I'm no longer running for Congress.
Yeah,
it is bigger, larger, more out of control than I can possibly explain.
More scrutiny, more time.
I don't fear the scrutiny. I don't fear the time.
Yeah.
But to quote a world famous movie. I'm not the droid they're looking for.
Okay.
I'm a 61-year-old white guy, and if you haven't noticed, there's a plethora of them back in Washington D.C. You know, and I think that especially the Republican Party is looking for lightning in a bottle. My primary opponent, a young man by the name of Gabe Evans, who is a sitting state legislature and a good guy. I like Gabe. Gabe and I are a lot the same ideologically, which is what's hard about primaries. Gabe is a 37-year-old Hispanic veteran cop. I am a 61-year-old white disc jockey. With a servant's heart.
You didn't check necessarily all the boxes.
I'm not winning any medals in the intersectionality Olympics. Let's just say.
Okay. So that was CD8 though, right?
What's that?
That was CD8.
That was CD8.
And do you feel like Republicans have a decent? Do we have a shot? Come on. What do you think? Surely there's hope, right? Like, I know it's Colorado.
There's always hope, young Luke.
Star Wars.
I'm freaking out on Star Wars right now. It is. Oh, wow. You said this was a largely political audience. It is a difficult time for Republicans. It is. Donald Trump is the wall upon which we all smash. And look, I agreed with a lot of what Trump did. I disagree with the way he carries his persona. I am a decidedly different personality than what the former president is. But I was very well aware of the fact that it would be Donald Trump's name and then my name right below it.
Yeah.
So that was part of my calculus. Part of my calculus was the fundraising difficulties I was having.
Yeah.
You are measured by the amount of money you can raise. And I struggled putting up the numbers that the National Republican Congressional Committee like to see.
Well, especially in primaries, it's hard to get big donors invested in primaries unless there's a clear. It's just like no contest. There's going to be a clear winner. If it's close at all, I'm sure it's hard to get people to.
Today
donate,
was, we record this on April 17th. April 15th is when quarterly reports were due. I've taken a look at Gabe. Me getting out of the race definitively helped Gabe because some of the money came off the sidelines.
Yeah,
and that's good because if I have already endorsed Gabe Evans, I can say that I think if the Republicans have a chance in the 8th Congressional, it's going to be through Gabe.
Yeah, and what do you think he needs to do in order to give him the best shot of winning?
Raise his name recognition.
Okay.
But he's running against in the primary against another guy that's got zero name recognition.
Assuming he's the nominee, though.
I think Gabe will come through as a nominee. What he's up against is, Republicans are in third place when it comes to voter registration in the state of Colorado. Democrats are in second. Number one registered voter in the state of Colorado is the independent unaffiliated. And there is nearly 44% of Coloradans sit in the middle, which means they think both parties are completely full of crap. And
that's interesting.
And by and large, they are.
Yeah. Well, the fact that independents are a plurality, that's interesting. Most people kind of assume that's one or the other.
No, that's the number one voting bloc in the state of Colorado.
There's a lot of movement that can happen in that 44%.
Well, you need the independent unaffiliated to win. Right. That's the only way you're going to win is if you deliver that electorate.
Yeah. So you think name recognition? Is there anything else that you think that he needs to do?
He's going to be running against Donald Trump and with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the wall upon which all Republicans smash. He is going to be battling an unbelievably well-oiled get out the vote and get in the vote machine. In the Democrat Party is a machine when it comes to voter not only turnout, but not only get out the vote, but get it back in. They're really good at ballot harvesting or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, yeah.
They intentionally stood up an effort in the 8th Congressional District here about a year ago to make sure that he's up against the Democrat machine, and in the state of Colorado, that's significant. I'm saying there's a chance, but Gabe's going to have to work hard.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're about out of time here, but is there anything, any closing words that you want to say, or like a show or social media that you want to shout out or anything like that? Where can people find you if they want to learn more about who you are?
Personal website where I philosophize and do an occasional podcast is scottkjames.com. jamesforweld.com is my commissioner website. I I encourage involvement.
Yeah.
People have to get out. They have to get involved. I talk. Your father upstairs in the church that we sit in the basement of did a God and Country series here recently that was phenomenally well received, and he used me as one of the talking heads in that. And one of the things that I talked about there was the golden triangle of freedom, about kind of the three legs of the stool, about how freedom requires virtue, and virtue requires faith, and faith requires freedom. And I talked in that about how we are a self-governing people, not only from the standpoint of a constitution and how we do manage our government affairs, but we need to govern ourselves. And one of the ways that we need to govern ourselves is we must be civically involved. If you, and I'll look directly at the camera and address you, if you think that your voice matters, it doesn't matter, it does. We need to self-govern, because if you're not involved in the role of self-governance, if you don't actively involve yourself in governing yourself, somebody will govern you. And that's why I'm involved. I don't like nobody governing me.
Well, that's a big paradigm shift. I mean, rather than, don't. I mean, yes, other people have authority over you.
It's constitutional republic.
But govern yourself. Otherwise, someone else will govern you. I like that a lot.
You have to be informed, and you have to be involved. And I know both sides look like they're on fire, and everybody's crazy right now, which is why you common folk need to be involved.
Yeah. I like that.
That's all I have to say.
That's a good way to end it, man. I love it. Well, Scott, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for doing this. Yes, sir.